Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Scott Schell and I'm a specialist in the Germanic languages. I have a PhD in Germanic linguistics from UC Berkeley, an MA in linguistics from Wayne State University, and a BA in German, also from Wayne State University. Today I would like to go ahead and discuss one of my favorite runic inscriptions of all time, the Björketorp Runestone. So the Björketorp Runestone, also known as DR360, that's how we catalog these things, was found in southern Sweden, and it is dated to about the middle to the late 7th century. It is an Elder Futhark inscription. We do have some runes that indicate a shift into Old East Norse, meaning like Danish and Swedish, as opposed to something like Old West Norse, which is more focused on Norwegian and Icelandic. So back in 2018, I went ahead and gave a presentation at the University of Aarhus. This is my primary reason for going to Denmark. But I also, of course, wanted to see some of these runic inscriptions in person. And so one of the inscriptions that I was able to see and observe and conduct research on was the Björketorp Runestone. And I was very fortunate to stay in this beautiful cabin. It was an Airbnb, and it was in a little town called Murum. And it was just beautiful. I mean, there were horses there. It was just this fairy tale land of, however you could imagine, a fairy tale land that's a forest in southern Sweden. I was very fortunate to stay there. So then once I got situated in Murum, still trying to get over the jet lag, I packed my things together and I went to go look at the Björketorp Runestone. This is now with my academic cap on. And so I get there and I notice that it is just these three amazing stones that stand probably roughly about 12 feet high, and they are in the middle of this little park. Unlike some of the runestones I've observed in the past, which are in museums, these ones are freestanding. They're just right in the field. It's just, I felt this overwhelming sensation of just like, wow, this is amazing. I'm actually standing at and observing and feeling and literally feeling, like touching where the grooves are, where the runes are, just to kind of get an idea of how difficult it would be to carve into granite. And it was just this interesting feeling, though, being there where some of the original rune masters were right there carving these beautiful inscriptions. So when I got there, I wanted to look at one thing in particular on the stone. It's this phrase that's found on the back of the stone, and it reads, "u-umlaut." Now, I had studied this inscription in depth already at this point. In fact, it made its way into my dissertation. But one of the scholars that observed this stone completely left that phrase out of his translation, which is kind of curious because the translation that he gave in his book, Runes in Germanic Linguistics, goes on for several pages and in great detail about each phrase on the stone. I wasn't too surprised, though, since this particular scholar is very anti-magic, anti-religion, specifically magic, though, in this era when it comes to runes and linguistics and their usage and whatnot. So I wanted to go there and give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm thinking maybe this part of the inscription is no longer visible, but I wanted to go there and see it for myself. As you can see here, the inscription itself is very clear. So this inscription is an Elder Futhark inscription, like I had mentioned. But what I wanted to do, and one of the biggest reasons too I wanted to go here, is to look at the inscription within the context. So all too often we give translations as runologists and we don't look at the context. The runologist that I keep referring to, Elmer Antonsen, was also known for that, not really looking at the context and just giving a straightforward translation. And as you'll see in this video, context is extremely important for analyzing a particular inscription. What was the medium, right, that the runes were carved on? Stone. Why was it stone and not bone or, wood? Or are there burial mounds around? So on and so forth. So we want to look at the totality of things. So yeah, like I was saying, there are three stones there, very tall, probably about between 11 and 12 feet. but only one of them had an inscription on them. So it has also been discussed in Carstens and Grimm, I'll go ahead and link the article down below for those of you who want to check it out, that these three stones are undoubtedly much older than the runic inscription itself. I mean, the stones themselves, these Bauta stones, date to, again, according to Carstens and Grimm, right around the Bronze Age, in which case it was very common to have these kinds of stones in that age. But the inscription does come later. Why choose this particular stone to carve this inscription? So we do know that there are grave fields nearby these three stones. There is not a grave beneath the stone per se, but it's very clear that this runic inscription is part of a wider holy place and also a place where cultic activity was performed. So I'll go ahead and start with these grave fields real quick, just because I do believe that the inscription is tied to these grave fields. They are not very far away. I remember when I was there, I could throw a baseball and it would land right in the grave field. I mean, that's how close the grave fields are to this particular stone. So let me go ahead and read a passage from Carstens and Grimm to give you an idea of what we're dealing with these grave fields, and actually the kind of impacts gravel workers had on the grave fields later on, and how they kind of accidentally desecrated and ruined some of these materials that were in the grave, and so on and so forth. The nearest surviving graves were found by gravel workers, approximately 100 meters east of the triangle. A cremation burial of the 1st centuries AD contained a shield boss, a fragmentary knife, and a ceramic vessel. Another burial, which defies dating, contained unidentified iron objects. Another grave that was damaged by gravel workers was excavated in 1946 and contained a sword and a spearhead from the Roman Iron Age. It can be assumed that the burials and the runestone formerly belonged to one big grave field, and possibly the burial ground existed from the Roman period to the late Iron Age. So therefore, there are multiple sources that suggest that these grave fields are directly tied to these three Bauta stones, and that the runic inscription itself must be dedicated really to the whole area, and not just necessarily to the stone itself. So before I go ahead and get into the actual inscription and what it says, I want you to also know that very close nearby is a judgment ring. This must also be taken into consideration when talking about this inscription. Now, this judgment ring consists of 7 stones, and traditionally with these judgment rings, you find 3, 7, or 9. So in our case, we're working with 7. And originally these judgment rings were ancestral places. They were ancestral burial grounds or an ancestral mound, which eventually became a place where the Germanic tribes held things called assemblies. It's literally called a thing, but they're called judgment assemblies, where they meet on these hills or in these rings. So undoubtedly, in my mind, the judgment ring, the grave fields, the 3 Bauta stones, plus the runic inscription all have to be linked together. And this might even sound obvious to you, like, yeah, maybe they should be linked together. And I think so too, right? I think it's pretty obvious, but again, within the field of runology, what we get many times is like this instance where there's an isolated translation of what it says, and then there's no other context given. So that's why I'm here. I'm here to give you this context, again, before we dive into the inscription itself. And so what I'll do is give you this quote real quick in German. It's from Professor Duvel, and I believe that his general statement of this area and this inscription is it's valid. And when we go ahead and start with that, I'm going to go ahead and give you an actual sort of zoomed out inscription, a transliteration rather, and a translation, and then we're going to go ahead and talk about some of the nuances in those translations and why maybe I'm choosing certain words to translate a certain way. So Professor Duvel says, "Eine Grabstätte liegt nicht vor. Dagegen sind in der Umgebung ähnliche Steinsetzungen gefunden worden, so dass es hier wahrscheinlich einen geweihten Platz, möglicherweise eine Kultstätte, handelt. So basically this just means there's not a grave site, he's saying. I mean, there is a grave site in the grave field, but not a grave site under the stone itself. However, or in contrast, there are, in the area similar stone settings that are found. So therefore, this is most likely a holy place, and very possibly a cult center, essentially. That's basically what his passage says in German. So I'm going to go ahead and show you here on the screen. This is a traditional way to transliterate this inscription. This is from Krause, 1966. And again, we're going to go ahead and talk about how I'm looking at this just a little bit differently. So I'll go ahead and give you Krause's normalization here. Utharpa spa, heider runo ronu falaka kedra, gina runar, ergir hermelauser, uti wela dalda, sar, dat brutter. Or something like that. It's just that Krause likes to write capital R where I believe there should be a Z. I'm not the only one who believes this, of course, but that's a totally different digression. So what Krause essentially says here with his translation that I've given you is Schadenprophezeiung. This is a harmful prophecy. And der Glanzrunenreihe Bagishya means these bright runes I hide here. Zauberrunen, magical runes. Durch Argheit, raslos, draußen. Ist eines Tückchen Todes, wer dies zerstört. So basically through perversity and restlessness, outside is this death, right? Whoever destroys this monument. And he actually says monument there, and that's why I wanted to quote his translation. He doesn't say this stone, he's actually saying Denkmal, in which case could be construed as the stone, anything in the grave field, possibly the judgment ring, stuff like that. So there's a scholar and runologist by the name of Luyenga, and she had suggested Utharpaspal should actually be read as a continuous line. So if you look here at the text I've given you on the screen, you'll see all kinds of alliteration. And if you look at where Utharpaspa is on the other side of the stone, it then connects to the other vowels that alliterate in that line, and it just kind of wraps around. So Luyenga proposes that it's actually a part of that line. It's not something that's just disjointed, from the verse on the other side. So Luyenga goes ahead and suggests that this means I foresee a needless death by treachery. I have an issue with that because I don't take spal, which by the way is related to foluspal. I don't take that as a verb. I take that as a nominative noun. Utharba spa, unneedful prophecy, is the way that I understand it. Otherwise, you can't do anything with the next word, which is wela dalda, which is a death by deceit, because that's in the dative case for us linguistic nerds out there. So what Luyenga does too is she reads where it says hedra, she actually reads that RA as a doublet. So the next line is not gin, but ragina. I personally think ragina makes a lot of sense. You also see that form on the Nolaby runestone, and essentially the runes do come from the gin regan, right? So like to say ragina kundo or ragina runos makes a ton more sense. And so one of the reasons she suggests that is because now we have alliteration again. So we have a doublet with alliteration there. We have alliteration with utharpaspa and uti. There's all kinds of what we call phonetic iconicity going on throughout the entire inscription. In other words, things that are repeated through alliteration in this case. So if we accept, which there may be people out there who vehemently disagree with me or Luyenga, if we do accept that the reading should be arranged or in this way, then this is what we have. Heid runo ronu falaka kedra, ragina runos argio hermelausus, utharbaspa utias wela dauda, Salstatbarus. So you can see now that there's alliteration everywhere in there. And even if we didn't arrange it this way, which really isn't rearranging it that much. I mean, the only thing that Louis Yenga's doing is basically putting that harmful prophecy phrase down where the other vowels are to alliterate. And again, it's not somewhere off in nowhere land, right? It's on the other side of the stone, but it really connects to those other vowels. So, and then, but for those of you who are keen to hearing, what I'm saying, the Salstatbarus is kind of weird. It's like, well, why does everything else alliterate? And then we have this weird phrase that says this, which is he or she who breaks this. And it's basically saying, like, here's this curse, here is the alliterative formula, and may, someone be subject to what we're going to call ergi or arger if they break this stone. So that actually brings me to my next word. For those of you who are up to date, when it comes to topics in Old Norse concerning ergi or arger, everybody will tell you that word means perversity, and it did in Old Norse times. But this is not an Old Norse inscription, right? This is closer to a common Germanic inscription. Yes, there are some tendencies here and there to sort of lean towards Old East Norse specifically, but in our case, I think it would be beneficial then if we look at the other Germanic languages and see what exactly did arger or ergi mean in these other Germanic languages. Because in this inscription, basically it says, may someone be subject to ergi if they break anything in this area, right? So basically what that means is may they be subject to perversity, and that just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. So subject to perversity, may you become a sissy, I guess could be a translation. But again, look at these other cognates. I think it makes more sense if we look into the wider Germanic side of things. So let's go ahead and look at those other cognates. We see here in Old High German, Old English, and Old Frisian, this word can mean someone who's a coward, someone who's timid, someone who lacks honor, someone who just lacks respect. So it does not necessarily have to be put in a sexual context. This is what I think is going on with Björketorp Runestone. I think it's not saying may this person suffer this curse and may they be subject to sexual perversity. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I think it makes more sense to say may the person who breaks this monument be inflicted with this curse because of the lack of honor and respect. That just makes a lot more sense to me. And again, it's like if we look at the Germanic cognates and we aren't just fixated on Old Norse, then we see how that could make sense. So the other thing I want to go ahead and address is the falach. People translate this as I hide here. Sometimes they translate it as I have hidden here. Sometimes it's I commit here. And then other times it's I have committed here. So I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details of that, but I will post it down in the comments if you guys are interested in seeing why that is. But what I will just briefly say is that usually it's going off of the Old Norse verb fela, which means to hide. So, in other words, the translation would read, I hide here these runes, right? These bright runes, magical runes. And I don't think that's the case, which is kind of hard for me to say, as you just heard me hesitantly say that, because I think it's really interesting if we can say, like, I have hidden these runes here, and it's got this very magical effect to it. But I also want to be truthful and say that it can very easily mean I commit or even entrust these runes here in this for this runic inscription. So if we look at Old Norse again, and we see instances where, Hervar Saga Okedrix is one. I'll go ahead and read that passage to you real quick. You'll see that it means I commit something, not I hide. Hanfa Ulni Alan Than Val. He committed all the slain to Odin. And then we have Sigurðar Kavida in Skama, Me Fruminga Fall on Megi Yukka. So we have here, he committed all the slain to Odin, from the Hervar Saga Okedrix. And then we have another passage, the girl so young he entrusted to the son of Giuki. So again, this verb can mean to entrust or even commit. If we look at the other cognates again, we see that Old High German, felahan, Old Saxon, befehlen, and so on and so forth can mean to commit in certain contexts. So I think that's what's going on here. All right, so let me go ahead and give you this holistic translation. It is not a word-for-word translation because, again, like I said in the beginning of the video, I'm trying to kind of zoom out a bit and look at this in a more contextual space. I entrust here a bright sequence of runes from the ruling gods. Harmful prophecy, condemned to a death by deceit for the one who breaks this, i.e. anything within the immediate landscape. May the person who does this be without protection when she leaves this place because of the lack of honor and respect. This makes more sense to me than because of, may this person basically be afflicted with sexual perversity, and how we're kind of translating that word ergi, again, in this time period. I want to reiterate, it does mean perversity in Old Norse times, but we're dealing with an era that way predates classical Old Norse. So this inscription is truly a magical inscription. You have phonetic iconicity all over the place. So in other words, you have alliteration, all of the H's, the vowels, the R's, right? You have all of this alliteration going on. And why is that? It's not just because poetry, because that can get kind of strange too, because poetry and magic kind of go hand in hand in many, many instances. So we have this curse formula, right? So whoever touches this stone and they break it, they're going to be afflicted with this curse. But how do we make that even better? Well, we make everything alliterate, right? We use poetry for it. So there's that. Then there's also this notion of committing bright runes from the heavens. This word that's actually used in its adjectival form is always reserved for something that's clear and bright in the sky, specifically. I'll go ahead and give you the citation of that because I know people are going to go, well, what about personal names and stuff like that? So I'll go ahead and give you that citation. So essentially we have phonetic iconicity, so alliteration. We have the indexical curse. We have the mere fact that this is on a sacred landscape, and we have mimicking the qualities of divine runes used by the ruling gods to guarantee the success of the curse. We have all of these different things, and all of these different things is, in my opinion, what makes it magical. So two small things real quick I want to mention, and that'll be it for this video. The first one is going to be that phrase, whoever breaks this. I want to address why is that not alliterating? Everything else seems to alliterate, but there's this weird phrase. It's kind of disjointed. Well, I've come up with the conclusion, I think, that this is just more of a conventional phrase that was tacked on at the end of inscriptions, where it's like, may someone be afflicted with this curse, blah, 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 whoever breaks this, salta brute. And the reason why I have come up with that as a conventional phrase, which conventional phrases exist outside of poetry, is because you can also see them, these phrases, on these runic inscriptions. We have DR360, DR357, DR338, obviously DR360, DR81, and VG67. They all have this phrase that says, sar, that, brut, whoever breaks this. So I think that we're basically working with this magical alliterative formula, and then you have that conventional phrase at the end. It's almost like a no trespassing sign, or it's just don't break this thing, by the way. So they have the magic, and then it's just kind of like, and don't break my stuff. So the last thing I wanted to talk about, and this one is a little more speculative, at least I'm prefacing it that way, is the idea of, I entrust here a bright sequence of runes from the ruling gods. I look at this as, because these runes are not necessarily the gods that are carving them, right? It's the rune master. And that's what makes this tradition very, very interesting. You have the rune master that's acting as the agent, acting this way, maybe somehow these divine powers are acting through him, and he is carving into the stone and entrusting these bright runes that are from the gods right here onto this stone. So you had that sort of rune master acting as a vessel to empower this runic inscription. So before I end, I'm going to go ahead and take the academic cap off for a minute and just say that while I did go there and I did study this inscription, and I said at the beginning of the video I put my academic hat on, I went back that night, had some dinner, and went back to this place with my practitioner's hat on. And one thing I can tell you is that it was just an amazing experience to be able to go to this stone, take my gond, knock on it 9 times, sing the Futhark, stuff like that. It was transformative. So I hope that you all enjoyed this video. I plan to make more. I've just been dealing with a ton of personal things, and that is why I haven't posted anything. So if you do like this video, please like it, share it, subscribe. Please, if you aren't subscribed, please subscribe, because my subscription numbers are actually really low. So if you guys can subscribe, I mean, relatively speaking to these other YouTubers, but if you can subscribe and share the video, comment for the almighty algorithm, I would really appreciate it.